All right. So it looks like we've started the webinar. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Uh, Before we get started, take the time to answer a quick poll question. It should pop up on your screen. It's something we're kind of gathering some information on, so we'll let that go now. There it is. So who should be responsible for leading cybersecurity at your organization? Should it be the security or compliance champion? That's fair. This isn't a test. We just want your opinions, right? The executive team, maybe the leadership team, the COO, CEO, something like that. The internal IT team, certainly a fantastic guess. Uh, and not sure. So a lot of what we do, we tailor around certain executives and certain leaders. So understanding your opinion on this is super valuable for us. So thank you very much. There will be one more poll right at the end of our discussion today too. So if you could answer that, that would be fantastic. Give y'all just a second to do that. And while you're doing that, I'm going to welcome you to our live webinar. Cybersecurity is an executive level issue, protecting your people, processes, and profits. Now, I'm Dan Mallard. I'm the Director of Client Success here at IronEdge. I've been with IronEdge over a decade, and I've been in the industry over 20 years, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. We have fantastic panelists. We'll have them introduce themselves just in a second, but let me just kind of start this thing by saying cybersecurity is no longer just an IT issue. It's a core business risk. It affects the entire business, from data breaches and ransomware to regulatory penalties and even cyber insurance denials. The consequences of weak security leadership can be devastating. And yet, too many organizations still treat cybersecurity as something their IT team can just kind of figure out. My IT guys will just figure that out. Today's conversation is designed for business leaders, and we're going to go beyond technical jargon to talk about what it really takes to protect your company's most valuable asset, its data, through strategy, accountability, and executive level oversight. So we are very fortunate to have an expert panel with us here today to help unpack these issues. And I'd like to start by having our panelists briefly introduce themselves. Maybe we'll start with Rob because he's on my left, and then go to Jackson and then Dave.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
My name is Rob Foit, Director of Security here at IronEdge. Been in the security industry or in this line of work for the last probably close to 10 years.
Fantastic. Rob's been with us several years now here at IronEdge. He's fantastic, leads all our security initiatives and different components of our company. Thanks for being here, Rob. Jackson.
Yeah, hi guys. My name is Jackson Stevens. I work at Galactic Advisors. We help MSPs with meeting their cyber liability needs. I'm an attorney. I've been a federal prosecutor, and I've also worked at a strategic communications firm as a consultant, assisting organizations who had faced data breaches with all of their PR needs and all their PR needs and responding to both external and internal audiences, as well as working through the data breach notification processes.
Thank you. We're very glad to have you, and Dave as well. Dave, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Groot, and therefore I am Groot. I was an MSP for roughly 20 years. I owned and operated an MSP, and about the last 7 years of that, I delivered primarily vCISO services to businesses. And so that's where my background is kind of anchored, but I am currently a security advisor with Galactic Advisors as well, and brought that experience to the table with them. So glad to be here.
That's fantastic. You and I are similar as far as being a vCISO and that type of role in the organization.
Yes, sir.
And we're really lucky to have Galactic with us on this webinar today. They're one of the partners that we really value and we work with. They can work with any MSP. They have fantastic offerings. This isn't a sales call, but they're fantastic. Look them up. You'll be really impressed with these guys. So let's go ahead and start our first topic here. And it's topic number one, which is really the topic is identifying cybersecurity risks, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to ask these folks some questions. We're getting some awesome feedback. We're going to bat it around a little bit. So Dave, I think this one's really for you. So let's start with the basics. What would you say are the most common cybersecurity risks you're seeing just in industry today? And why do you think they're often overlooked or even misunderstood?
I think on some level, I think you summarized it really well at the beginning of the webinar. The biggest thing that we see out in the world as far as is the misconceptions. They think they're covered. They think, as you know, in many cases, because there's technical controls, things like antivirus and such in place, it's an IT department issue. And so when an IT department does what they do, or an MSP does what they do, and they put some stuff in place, they have this false sense of security that they are completely taken care of and covered, which is not always the case. In most cases, it's not. But the bigger part you mentioned that is they're not always even aware of what it is they're protecting, right? What are those critical data assets? And then what ways are we protecting them? And are there gaps that we need to take care of? So those are the biggest things. It's just not knowing, right? It's thinking they're exempt, thinking they don't have any issues, having a complacent posture because they feel that they're okay.
That's a fantastic answer. And I say that a lot when I'm talking to clients. That really lines up with what we see too, is also security isn't set it and forget it. And they say, well, I set that platform up 5 years ago when we started doing this thing. What do you mean it's not secured out? So yeah,
Absolutely.
completely agreed. All right, I'm going to throw this one over to Rob. Thanks for that answer, Dave. I'm going to throw this over to Rob. All right, Rob, what indicators or early warning signs should businesses be watching for that suggest they may be at risk? And this kind of dovetails real nicely with the SharePoint issues that were 0-day yesterday that came out. But so Rob, in summary, what should people watch for to suggest something may be concerning, or they're under a status where it's something risky going on?
So it kind of goes back to a little bit of Dave's answer as well. So, you can't just set things and forget things, right? So, you need to have dark web checks. So, see what credentials or information is about your employees or your company domain on the dark web. Because if it's out there, it's an indicator that maybe they haven't hit you yet or tried to hit you yet, but it's going to happen, right? There was always, back in the day when I first started in IT, it was always, well, I'm a small company. No, I'm not a big fish. Now it doesn't matter. So you want to understand what's out on the dark web about you, your employees, so you can understand that. Also, not conducting vulnerability scans or using outdated systems or software. A big one coming up is Windows 10 expires at the end of October. If you're not on Windows 11, Microsoft will not provide patches, updates, etc., and you're exposed. So just making sure you're doing a lot of those basics. MFA to have a second layer of protection, and regular update cycles, not just for Windows, but for everything that runs an operating system, which is everything we use in IT.
Yeah. So it's kind of, and I'm gonna bounce this back off you, see if you agree. It's not really keeping up with your systems as far as service extensions and renewals, or operating systems expiring, or data being on the dark web that you didn't know about. So there's this proactive and always on effort probably to sort of evaluate that stuff.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on it too with the SharePoint issue that came out over the weekend. Microsoft just released an update for it yesterday. Keeping up to date on those and being mindful of information, or having somebody in the organization that's mindful of that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know that within our industry, the MSP industry, that's one of the big value adds that we provide is people in our position will evaluate all that stuff. And then we use tools and systems like Galactic to do the same. Thank you, Rob. All right. Rob, I got another one for you. I'm going to get you. From your experience, where do most breaches really begin? Are they more due to technology gaps? Are they due to human error? Can you give me an example? What are your thoughts?
So typically what we see is it starts on the human side. Typically from somebody clicking on a phishing email or somebody making the decision not to replace an end-of-life system. We unfortunately have seen both, where an end-of-life system was not replaced and bad actors got in. And then again, with phishing emails, somebody clicks on something because they think it's legit enter in their credentials. So now, credential harvesting has happened to where bad actors can either sell that information to somebody or use it to their advantage and try to log into their 365 and misroute, jump in the middle of an email string and get payment routed to them instead of a third party.
Yeah. Yeah. If you were to choose, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, in our industry and what we see, so we can speak from experience, would you say it's we get more things coming in that are human error or more technology related? What would be your guess?
It's human error, because even from a technology thing, if the human doesn't configure the technology correctly, there's a gap.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if they're entering their credentials into a phishing site and they may not know better and they think they're doing the right thing, they enter that stuff, then it's a human error, right?
Yep.
So that's what we see all the time. Thanks, Rob. That's fantastic. Topic number 2 we're going to talk about is just my mitigating cybersecurity risks. So, Dave, I'm going to put you on the spot again. How often should organizations conduct a cybersecurity risk assessment, and who should be responsible for leading it?
Okay. So, it's kind of fun how all the questions and the answers fit together when you get into a topic like this, because like the lessons learned with things like the SharePoint. I want to just touch on some of that for a minute, if I can.
Sure, of course.
That was a 0-day exploit, which means to everybody out there that nobody knew about this as an issue. Somebody found out about it as an issue and used it against Microsoft before anybody was aware of it. There was any time to make a patch, basically to mitigate the problem, right? And so how do you protect yourself as an organization against something like that? And what it comes back to is it's about your process. It's about those layers. It's about having layers of security. So if one thing fails, we have another thing to stop it. Today, in the landscape we face, it's not about, we used to say we're going to protect the organization, right? Now we're minimizing the damage. And that's the truth, because reality is nobody is able to ever say that they cannot be hacked, right? As you said, it is a human issue in most cases. You can have many controls in place, but if somebody clicks on a link, just by the nature of technology and the way things work, it honors that request and lets the payload in many cases if it's not configured well, right? So it's about the process. What happens now when I have something that I didn't realize was going to ask me for my username and password? Do I have that policy in place that's going to take care of that? That's not something that a risk assessment is necessarily going to be able to help you with. And that's what your question was. So I'll get back to that for a second. But
of course,
that, from a perspective of maturity and watching for changes in the organization and the fact that we have the human element, we can have controls, tools, things in place and configured properly that are now being maintained. And a human makes a change to turn the security off momentarily to make a change and forgets to turn it back on as well, right? That's still human error. It's just like clicking on a link in a phishing email. And how do you know about those things? By doing these assessments, right? Where you're doing these vulnerability assessments on all the systems in place, and you're looking at the risk and the data and the assets that you're protecting, and you're determining if it's an acceptable risk against these data assets as an organization or not. At which point you then make decisions on how to mature and make it better. Take away the risk. Risk is based on likelihood of an event happening or what the impact of that event is when it happens. So you're looking to lessen risk by lessening the likelihood or lowering the impact, right?
Right.
Those are the things that the cyber risk assessment is going to work with and help you know what it is you're looking at. Sorry, I know that was a really long answer.
Fantastic answer. And who, in your experience, who most often leads the risk assessment, that process?
So I mean, that should certainly be the person in charge of the information security program, and that that can vary in organizations. We're looking at potential, the CISO, the executive team. It's not, as we mentioned in the beginning of the conversation here, it's not strictly an IT department kind of conversation. This risk, this things that we're talking about, the cyber insurance, and the fact that we want to make sure a policy would be paid, a claim would be paid if we had an event, if our policy is there and active. Those are all executive level decisions and responsibilities. The risk lies at that level. So you can't just turn it over to the IT department and say they've got it covered and we're good. You have to verify that, because you will be the one held accountable if something goes wrong.
That's a really strong answer, really great answer. There was an analogy that somebody used in a meeting I was in one time where they said, "Hey, I can put all these layers in to protect you to the client, right? But if your employee comes in and unlocks the door and opens it and lets somebody in, there's not a lot I can do about that." It was a fantastic answer. I'm going to dovetail on that a little bit. Once a risk is identified, what would you say the most critical steps an organization can take to mitigate it? And I know it's kind of a vague question, but in general, when there's a risk identified in an organization, what should people do? What's 3, 4, 5 things they should do maybe?
Well, again, I say, determine the value of the risk, right? What is the likelihood of that happening, right? So let's make an understanding. We're talking about security. We're talking about, in some cases, regulatory pressure, compliance, whatever the word might be, that's making a company look at a requirement and put it in play. But it doesn't make a lot of sense for a company to put a requirement in at a great expense, to put controls in place of a requirement, if that requirement never touches their business process and it doesn't improve the security posture, simply because it's words on a piece of paper. Now, I'm not saying we ignore those things. I'm not saying those aren't as important, but you need to prioritize based on risk, based on feasibility of it being accomplished. And then certainly it's not a one thing. It's let's look at what's feasible and reasonable, and look again, what is the appetite for the risk that not acting is giving you, right? Where are you standing if you don't act quickly?
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. To mitigate some of those concerns as they come up in real time and things are identified, what I've always advised my clients to do is to have budget set aside for things like that.
Exactly.
Or kind of these kind of sudden-ish things that you find in a review. Somebody finds something that's a risk. Well, we have budget set aside. So that's something.
That's right. Because ultimately things are going to pop up, right? Systems change, new stuff gets installed. We have a new process, a new way, another department, something else. I mean, it happens all the time, constantly.
Yeah. What do you think is the best proactive cybersecurity investment that delivers high ROI for small to mid-sized business? What's an idea there?
Well, I think that there's two really big things, and again, touching back on it, the assessments, right? Doing the assessment, knowing what it is you're protecting, understanding what the risk is, and then doing something about it. But the other thing is to have a plan. Listen, if you're not planning now, and this touches on cyber insurability as well. If you're holding a cyber insurance policy, there's a great likelihood that cyber company, that insurance policy, is requiring you to have an incident response plan, and you to be doing what is considered or called tabletop exercises, which means you kind of play role play going through your process to handle that incident, to make sure it's going to work. And if you find problems or infallibilities, you fix them as you're going through it, right?
Yeah, we just did one the other day, and we did a tabletop, and we found 3 or 4 things that everybody at the table kind of went, "Oh, I didn't realize that was an issue." And what we say is the value
it's
is not
amazing when you start talking, right? And you have the conversation of just like this it makes it very real in an organization when you go through those processes, because you start to realize, oh, this really does touch our stuff, right? This really is very important. So it's a great exercise.
100%, 100%. Thank you very much, Dave. It's fantastic. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We want to pull in Jackson. We're really excited to hear from him too. So let's talk about responsibility. When a cyber incident happens, who's ultimately, we get this a lot too, who is ultimately held accountable? Is it the IT team if there's a cyber incident? Is it executive leadership? Is it the board? Is it the MSP? Is it a tool? What are your thoughts there, Jackson? What do you see?
Yeah. So what I see, so it can be any one of those, right? They're all going to have their own, who is held responsible is kind of a matter of perspective. Generally, I would say this, it's going to be the organization as a whole, okay? None of those people are going to be personally liable in court. but the organization is going to have a very fundamental threat to its business. If there is a judgment against you, generally speaking, cyber insurance, and we're going to talk about that in a little later. Cyber insurance is going to pay off the settlement or the legal case. However, if it's more than the settlement, well, then that needs to come out of the corporate coffers. Additionally, if I was the CEO or CISO, I'd be very concerned about my job. Oh, one other thing I just mentioned with the insurance is you could also see the insurance company raising rates as a result of this incident. And as a result, the business just isn't feasible anymore. It's like driving a car if you don't have enough money to pay for the auto insurance. It's it's a requirement. Legally, not a requirement like auto insurance, but practically speaking, you've got to have it. You've absolutely got to have it.
That's a really strong answer, that basically the organization overall is, I mean, that's who's going to be accountable for this thing. And then kind of talking a little bit more about the cyber insurance. In general, how would you see that factors into overall risk management strategy, just having an insurance plan? What does it solve?
It's
How, what do you
Oh
think?
yeah, it's essential. You have to have insurance. Just like I said, with you wouldn't drive a car. You're not allowed to drive a car without insurance because of the threat that it poses. It is central to your business and the feasibility of your business. Data breaches are going to happen. It happens all the time. Sometimes it's a result of human error, not patching things, using legacy systems. Sometimes it's a result of a 0 day that you can't help. But you're going to need an insurance company to help pay for everything that happens starting on the day of the incident. So these are going to be your partners when the incident happens, and so you need to have them there. Uh, I would offer the when a plaintiff's attorney, when a class action attorney starts suing a company because of a data breach, ultimately what they're looking for is the insurance policy maximum. That's going to be their target. They don't
Okay.
need to go over and above that because you can't bleed a turnip. You're probably not going to get more money out of the company. But they are going to have an eye towards your insurance policy. So if you have $1 million insurance policy, that becomes the target that they're looking for.
That,
More specifically, right?
yes, yes.
In insurance, right? You have an incident um, that your partnership with that insurance company is really going to be important because day of, they're going to pay for an attorney, a law firm with specific experience in data breaches. You'll get a data breach coach, data breach cybersecurity attorney that's going to help you with your case that you have a attorney-client privilege with, right? So the insurance company doesn't get to hear all that, and they will hold you hand and guide you every step of the way. The insurance company is going to pay for the forensic investigation, right? Pulling all the logs, documentation, trying to figure out what was the root cause of everything. They're potentially going to pay for a PR firm to help you with strategic messaging, right? What are you going to tell your employees about this? What are you going to tell your investors and your clients, your partners? Uh, uh, yeah. Did I cover everything you had
You
there?
absolutely did. I'm going to ask a question
Yeah.
to kind of finish off that thought.
Yeah.
Are there times where people get things wrong related to cyber insurance? In other words, do you see a lot of times where people have filled out forms wrong and then they're not covered or those type of things?
Yeah. It actually happens frequently. And if you do, the legal research that we've done, we can find instances where the insurance company ultimately contested they paid out the claim, and then they're going back to that company and they're saying,
Wow.
no, we're not liable on that claim. Uh, here's where here's where that comes up, right? First of all, the company didn't understand what is being covered under their cyber liability insurance.
Right.
And so there was a disconnect there. So, for example, some policies, some insurance policies don't cover criminal activity. And so the insurance company may claim that this data breach was done by criminals, and so therefore the policy doesn't cover it. So it's something to look at, right? Don't assume that's already always covered. Another issue that may come up is insurance. The insurance may deny a claim because it's an insider threat, right? They say,
Oh,
no, 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 we
interesting.
don't cover insider threats. So
Okay.
not all cyber liability insurance is built the same. So it's very important that you know what you're paying for. The other
That's
thing that I would just offer too is
sure.
not informing them fast enough. They need to be your
Okay.
first, right? Because if you take any actions following the incident, they're going to say, well, you handled the incident response wrong, and so therefore we're going to deny the claim. It's like going and getting surgery, and then that requires a prior approval, and then you come back to the insurance company and you say, hey, I just dropped 10K.
Yeah.
And the insurance is going to say, no, 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 no. You got to use our panel and attorneys, our panel forensic companies. They have pre-negotiated rates with those folks, and so you do have to play their game. But I will say, in my experience of probably doing 24 of these things,
Yes.
I have always been very, very impressed with the attorneys that they bring on board for these. They're very qualified and they are looking out for your specific interests. They're sure they're paid for by the insurance company, but they don't owe that duty of loyalty. They owe a duty of loyalty to their client, which is you.
I can mirror that and say that I've been also involved in several dozen through the years. I would say the exact same thing, that the professionals that they bring in from a response standpoint and an evaluation standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from all those things, they're fantastic. And
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but there's 3 or 4 or 5 key players in that industry that I hear those names over and over and over.
Yeah.
And what we try to reflect a little bit, what you said was fascinating, and I learned a lot. What we tell our clients is oftentimes when we detect something that could be a cyber event, Rob's team chimes up and said, "Hey, this could be an issue." We tell the client right away, "Hey, you should pull in your cyber. You should
Yeah.
consider. We're not going to tell them what to do. You should consider pulling your cyber insurance right now." Let me ask you one quick question. Is there an amount of time that you think is a sweet spot? Would you say within the first 24 hours? That's probably,
Hey, I'm so glad you asked
yeah.
that. I'm so glad you asked that because I was thinking the same thing. Yeah,
Okay.
within 24 hours, you need to let the insurance company know what's happening, and they're
Okay.
going to get you connected with an attorney. The reason that time is of the essence with these things is that you have certain clocks that begin ticking the moment that you've discovered the breach. Okay, so a good attorney is going to, play with that word, what constitutes discovery of a breach. They're going to try to push it out as far as they can, but they can only do so much. But you have regulatory requirements, right? You may have to let the state attorney general or a state supervisor know that you've been hacked. There are rules about how soon you do data breach notifications. And so if you waste time with that, right, because you haven't got the forensics done, for example, you can be liable for a regulatory enforcement action for not doing that. I think the other place that we see it a lot is when you look at these class action lawsuits, they always, always love to highlight the delay that took
Okay.
place between the data breach and letting the victims of the data breach know about it. And so, it's a complicated thing because you've got to do a lot of forensics. I've also seen where, everything was wiped. And so now the forensics company has to download, right, something off of Tor, which is slow as hell.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's going to take many, many weeks. However, that's why getting something out the door, getting the right partners on board quickly, having an incident response policy
There's
helps
the
a lot.
key. Right.
There we go.
I've
There you
been
go,
waiting for that
Dave.
word to come up. Keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah. I teach, I coach Little League, and I tell my players, listen, we play like we practice. Okay, so be ready with those incident response plans so that you are ready to go. And you know what? It's great if you can do a tabletop exercise or game it out. That's something that we have folks like Cody Kretzinger, who's a former Black Hat,
Oh,
who
cool.
just does for some firms. All of that is really, really key to managing your legal liability, on down the road.
That's going to be some fantastic sound bites that we can cut out, the 24-hour, a lot of the stuff. That was really, really valuable. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I got to jump over to Dave again. So Dave, I'm coming at you with this one. We're going to talk about people, culture, and leadership, and specifically for you, Dave. How do you create a culture of security awareness, just a culture in your organization that truly resonates with employees that they can buy into, can subscribe to outside of the training they're doing quarterly or annually or when they get hired?
Yeah, yeah. A couple of things there. I mean, the obvious answer to that is it's a top down kind of issue, right? It has to start with the executive team. The buy-in has to start with them. They have to actually put teeth into the security program and into the administrative side of those controls, which are your policies and your procedures.
Yes.
To offer the enforcement of that so that you can then use the technical controls and tools that you have to with no impedance. However, that doesn't mean we rip apart everybody's process and stop their day because we want to be secure and they have to be compliant. And guess what? That's the priority now. That's not the case on any level. The priority is still business needs to operate and they need to do what it is that they're there to do and make business, money and continue to grow and serve their clients. That usually is handled best with an internal person. First off, we like to call them the compliance champion, right? That
Yes.
might be not necessarily an executive. They can be a manager or even a lower level employee, but they need to be somebody who knows where to go to get answers to questions in the organization about how things are done, right?
Yes.
If we're going to put in a password requirement and it's going to have complexity and length and it has to be changed, we might want to make sure that it doesn't break the parts department, right? Like, let's go talk to the parts manager and say, is there any problem that you see with this program? Does it support complex requirements? What I'm using that as one example, but it's
sure.
You got to make sure. And sometimes there might be a need to disrupt process and change it a little bit because it just needs to, right? But in most cases, you're able to put controls in place and you're able to provide that level of security, meeting the requirements while still fitting into the process. And when you do that, and the executive team buys into it and enforces it, the middle management appreciates the support that they're getting, which then resonates down to the folks who work with them. And they see that on their face every morning. And that's going to be a big part of getting that culture to shift.
That's fantastic. Would you say in your career, and I'm going to throw you a softball here real quick, would you say that executives and CEOs, folks like that, are the easiest to get to change their behavior or the hardest?
Well, so I'll probably get in trouble if I answer this way, but executives are very willing to enable and enact administrative controls with the exception of them. That's a problem because they're usually the largest target. So that's a part of that culture, right? You can't have this, everybody does it this way, but I don't, right? That's leaving a big gap. It's a big hole. You're the weakest link. You don't want to do that. I mean, listen, you just heard Jackson talk about all these different things potentially from a legal perspective, but look at it from a lot of different things, business and strategically. If you have an incident that's of any sizable amount, right, that you need to notify and you need to go to the state and tell them you had this many records, you need to notify the clients or whomever it is that we're notifying that this data was breached and so forth. You're not just looking at that. You're looking at, reputational damage. You're looking at paying people, like a forensic investigation for a small business that has, let's say, 20 to 50 people and computers to support that infrastructure. If we're talking 12 to 15 days, and that's in a good case scenario of tied up equipment, meaning you can't touch the environment because it's currently being forensically investigated for a breach, you have two options: build a new one or wait. And you have staff sitting there getting paid doing nothing, right? You have your competition just like licking their lips, waiting for a reason and a way to advertise and take your clients away, maybe some of your best people away. This is all the things that can come up as a result of it. So the impact is very huge.
We call that reputational risk, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Yes.
And you can't recover that, right? There's no way you can sue to retain that, to regain you're standing in the eyes of your customers.
And an insurance company cannot reimburse you for that.
Yeah, yeah, we had a customer, or actually they weren't a customer. They came to us because they had a concern. They weren't an existing customer. This is back during COVID-ish times, and they basically had a crypto event on their server infrastructure, locked everything up. They had no way to recover. They just didn't have correct backups, had nothing. So it took us, basically securing the environment, cleaning the environment, doing everything we could. Took about a month, and by that time they'd basically gone out of business. Their competitors came in, took their clients, and it was just a nasty thing.
And that's not like a one-off, right? I mean, that month period of time is not uncommon. 2 weeks. I mean, that's like, if that happens, consider yourself extremely lucky if you're done in 2 weeks' time, right?
I'm going to ask, I totally agree with you. And I want to know maybe Jackson's experience and opinion on this. And certainly, we all understand everything's anonymous here. Can you think of a situation like that where better planning, it just really stood out to you that you're talking legally with somebody, you're like, wow, better planning or documentation certainly could have saved this person. Can you think of any times like that?
I mean, I think I see that in every case.
Wow.
It's a plaintiff's attorney, right? These are the ones who are suing, right? You're the defendant, but it's the plaintiff's attorney's job to make you look negligent. That's what they're doing there. And we can call them a scumbag and we can hate them all we want, but they're just doing their job, right? And I've done both sides, and a game recognized game. So here's what I would say about the documentation and managing liability. Okay. Everything is evidence. Every fact, there are very few, so long as evidence is relevant to the case, it's probably coming in. The tricky thing, right, and this is where the lawyers come in, is what weight to assign a particular type of evidence. So if your CEO or your CISO takes the stand or sits in a deposition and talks about what happened, the other side is going to say, that's great that they got up there and said it, but they're biased, right? Their testimony was self-serving. And so what you need corroborating evidence. You need something to corroborate the testimony. And that's where documentation comes in, right? Have you documented what the state of your network looked like prior to the incident? Do you have the right logs? Can you show that things were patched on time? Do you have the user agreements that talked about risk acceptance? All of those things are important documentation to have. I guess the one other thing that I'd add to that, Dan, is the process starts at the very beginning. If you need to make sure that you have an MSA or statement of work that describes what the relationship is between you and your customers with regard to that personal data. If they've accepted risks, you need to have those risks signed and on file. We can't just wing it here. We need to have signed paper. The other thing to bear in mind is do any of those things conflict with each other, right? Is your MSA different from your statement of work, which is different from your risk acceptance, right? All of those things you need to have your ducks in order, because if your client walks into a courtroom and says, well, I've got this and this and this and this, and they're all saying something different, a jury, and that's very few of these cases actually go to trial, but that weakens your case because that a jury is going to go cross-eyed looking at these things, right? A pipe fitter isn't going to understand, how all this legal documentation fits together, and so they're going to try to piece it together. And if they see, right, that those things contradict each other, they're going to say, well, how did this client even know what they were buying?
That's fantastic. I have a follow-up question real quick,
Yeah.
and I know we're just riffing a little bit, but do you see situations where you have somebody that has suffered a cyber event, and then their vendors had access to their data, and their vendors had access to the data, and there's this data sort of chain of responsibility? How does that work legally?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because that's something that I've been, looking at lately to help out our partners and drafting the right, template documents and I can't give them independent legal advice, but I can certainly give them templates for, hey, take a look at this, take it to your attorney, customize it how you want to. But with respect to vendors, under the under the CCPA, the California Privacy Act, right? We need to have an agreement in place between you, who is the owner of the data, because your customers gave it to you, and the organization that you're handing that data off to, so that they understand that they need to keep that safe. Because if they lose it, if their company gets breached, it's going to come back to you. The other piece that I would also add is that there's been some recent case law that says that you need to check up on those vendors and have some kind of oversight with them to say, hey, are you safekeeping your data the way you're supposed to, that's described in our contract? I guess the one other piece too is, now think about it from the client, right? The client under the CCPA needs to understand that their data may be going to another vendor, for purposes, related to customer support or just to the tech stack, right? We all have a tech stack that involves transferring data from one party to another, and you need to make sure you understand how that works and you have the right signatures to make people understand. Doesn't mean you have to have a separate document. That can be built into your contracts, but it needs to be there. It's a requirement that it's there if you do business in California.
Best practice, and we've heard that through the years. It's gotten more and more traction underneath it, where our clients come to us and say, okay, how do we navigate this together?
Yeah,
I
There's
heard of
a lot
it.
more of those requirements, and you're seeing a lot more requirements in agreements, right?
Okay.
That's right.
We're having clients come in saying, hey, we're having our vendor ask us about this, or we're having our clients ask us about this. Do we have these things? And that's happening because the industries are becoming more aware of the risk.
Yeah, it's complicated. T-Mobile just got hit. T-Mobile just had a big T-Mobile had a vendor that was helping them do customer contact stuff,
Okay.
right? So if they wanted to send text messages to their customers, they would push certain information to this vendor, and then the vendor was responsible for sending the texts, right? Well, that vendor was hacked, and so T-Mobile was pissed, right? And so but the lawsuit isn't going to be against that little vendor who has, who does $2 million in revenue. They're going to go after the company with the biggest market cap, which is T-Mobile.
Really strong. We could probably have a breakout and just talk about that for an hour. Seriously, just sort of how we all interplay together with that and how it's changed over the last 10 years. Well, guys, we're getting toward the end. I want to talk about some forward-thinking stuff to kind of wrap this thing up. And then we're going to open up the floor to some questions. So, what are your thoughts? And this is for all of you. Certainly chime in. What's the biggest cybersecurity risk you believe most organizations still aren't talking about? Rob, let's start with you.
Yeah, so honestly, shadow IT and software as a service sprawl. Because
what does that mean? What does shadow IT mean?
I was going to get there.
Yeah.
So shadow IT or SaaS sprawl. So it's where maybe your accounting group needs an application to help them do their job more efficiently. They can go out and buy an application using the company credit card. They bring it in, they set it up, they use it. Your IT department or your MSP has no knowledge of this. And so information goes into those that, as we were just talking about, it could be personal client information that if something were to be compromised from that vendor, you're not liable. So, this is shadow IT has been an issue since IT started decades ago. And
Can you bring my computer in and update it on the network anymore from home?
yeah, so that's what nobody takes that into consideration. And then, and Dan, I'm sure you've heard this too, is, why didn't you know about this application? And they're talking to the IT department or MSP. It's like, because your CFO or your, marketing manager went off and bought this.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. We've seen that years for the past 15 years with apps like Dropbox. Somebody somewhere in an organization will sign up for a Dropbox account, get it going, be sharing client data, internal data, whatever, with this Dropbox. Well, that's not managed by the IT department. It's sort of shadow managed by somebody that has a credit card in the organization. And those things can, without a doubt, because they're not overseen by the IT department, they can get attacked and are quite easy to attack sometimes because they're
Yeah,
not set up in a
because
standard way.
it goes back to that human error. It's
Right.
not set up correctly. And
Right.
just one of the things we see in credential harvesting attacks on organizations, most of the bad actors are using Box or Dropbox as that intermediary to collect that information and ship it off to Russia.
Yeah. Yes. We're seeing a lot more of those from legitimate platforms like Dropbox are leveraged to attack somebody, and it looks totally legit because it is a legitimate platform.
Mhm.
So we could talk. I'd love to have a breakout with the people on this call on those type of issues as well. But let me ask Jackson, what's the biggest cybersecurity risk you believe most organizations still aren't even
I think it's
discussing?
business email compromise.
Okay.
I think that the threat actors now are largely done with just blanket phishing campaigns or just pinging every IP to see if they can find a hole. I think it's spear phishing. I think it's finding CEOs and people who have influence, hacking their email, and then sending an email to accounting saying, write a check to this account. Now, I, in particular, I worry because CEOs may not be educated about how these things happen. They want to be able to access their business, they want to be able to access everything in their business via their phone and their personal laptop, right? If those aren't assets that are being tracked by your managed service provider, right, then they're wide open for a business email compromise attack.
Yeah, in our world, we see the business email compromises almost every day, maybe every day. So for us, it's commonplace. We see it all the time. But any individual business may have never even talked about it. We just see them in mass, right? Because that's what we do. But you grab a business owner off the street, they may have no awareness. I think, oh, that's an issue. Why is that an issue? Why is my computer a problem? But I totally
I
agree
hate
with
to
you.
blame it on age too, but I think oftentimes many of these CEOs uh, they are less educated than some of their
Sure.
younger employees are about those risks. Um, Yeah, and so they get an email and they're more likely to click it. And you know what? The days of crappy phishing emails, those are over, right? The
Yes.
emails that were so obviously fake
Yeah.
because it was, poor English. ChatGPT drafts those phishing emails, instantly.
Instantly, and ChatGPT can make it sound like it's coming from someone in the United States talking about actual business matter, and I totally agree. That's another thing that I'd love to have a breakout. We've had some before on just AI and how it's being used in the threat vector. But yeah, thank you very much for that answer. Let me ask Dave real quick, and then we're going to go on to the end here. We have a very very quick live Q&A that we're going to get to in just a second. So Dave, from your perspective, what's the biggest cybersecurity risk you believe most organizations still aren't talking about?
Dan, I think you just said it right there.
Okay.
AI, right? Like, I mean, not only can I have it sound like somebody from the United States, but it can be you. I can take a recording of this webinar and I can build a bot that'll talk just like you do and make your friends and colleagues think it's you on the other end of the telephone. So to me, that is without question the biggest cyber risk right now.
Terrifying, and the growth of that industry has created more and more capability that we can't even wrap our minds around it. You could have AI develop code to attack things that someone would take them months or years to do. The AI can just figure it out.
Well, it's that, but it's also not managing the use inside their organization and data leakage,
Oh,
right? So it's a huge liability. Your data, like again, we're talking about
yes,
notification of breach.
Yep.
If you put it into a
yes,
public learning machine, right, and it can,
yeah.
not a good thing. It's a
Yeah,
bad.
try this. Go on ChatGPT and ask it questions about yourself, right? Tell ChatGPT, tell me everything you know about Dave Groot. And boy, I'll tell you, I'll get
No,
some
don't
very
do
useful
that.
material.
Stop.
I can almost certainly find your home address.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
we should dovetail on that and talk about it here in the next webinar. It's amazing. It's incredible. It's like the internet in general, right? The positive is incredible. The negative, pretty negatively incredible, right?
Yeah. One more thing on AI,
Sure,
Dan, is
sure.
have a policy on how to leverage it. Like, if you don't want people putting stuff into freeware chat GBT, buy Copilot from Microsoft.
Yeah.
Or
Because,
buy GPT.
Correct.
yeah,
That's good.
You
because
can
if,
buy a public license of that too, right? An enterprise.
yeah,
Mhm.
because at that point, it is supposed to be your data and not used to learn. Because my biggest fear, and Dan knows this because he and I've talked about this, is we don't allow people to drop information, client information into chat GBT because we don't want at some point our client information showing up in a search.
Yeah.
Exactly my point. And
Well, and here's the legal thing. Rob, just following on that, right? That's your policy. Where's that policy written? And has someone from the company
Right.
signed it and said,
Yeah.
we understand that this is the policy?
I got one last rant if I
Yeah,
can
of
squeeze
course.
it in really
Of
quick.
course. Yes.
It comes back to all of the things, and you asked me in the very beginning of this, what is the biggest risk for small business? And I want to change my answer.
Okay.
It's the lack of governance. Okay. And this is where I see clients and businesses across the board failing. It's the having the administrative implementations, meaning the policies, which are the rules of the game, right? And then the enforcement of those rules is your tool set, the technical controls. That's where IT comes in. They come in enforcement of those administrative control implementations. But that all needs to be governed. That
Right.
has to be documented. You have to collect the evidence of it. You have to have people signing off on having read the policies. All of those things need to take place. And that is the part that most of these small businesses, when I say small, we're talking even up to 500 folks in the
course.
organization, they just don't have that in place. And that's where they fall when they have an insurance claim or when they have a breach or an incident. And I'll stop right now because I could go on about an hour and a half on that too. So.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic discussion, guys. And we didn't even get into if you're using vendor products that have AI in it, what does that mean? Like you can trace this thing out and out and out and just say, I don't even know what the risk here is. I have no idea. We'll leave that to another day. We'll fight that battle and discuss it another day. But guys, I want to thank you all for everything that you contributed. It was fantastic insights and really a great discussion today. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us as well. Now, before we move into our Q&A for the next 9-ish minutes, 10-ish minutes, we're going to pop up another survey, another poll. We're going to pop that up right now. It just popped up. So if you could address that poll and say, would you like to be contacted, so on and so forth, fill that thing out. That's really helpful for us. But while you're filling that out, let's see here. And I'll just say the strategy doesn't have to end today with this webinar. We can help you take the next step. And we work together. We're partners that IronEdge and Galactic works together. And we as a group can help you take that next step. So let's take some questions from the audience. So I am excited to hear. Okay, we've got one from Alvaro. For small and mid-sized businesses operating with limited cybersecurity and legal resources, which is arguably most small to mid-sized, what proactive steps should they take today to prepare for the growing impact of AI? Oh, he may have typed this right before we talked about AI. What steps can we take? And so we talked about having policies in place and just sort of overall thought on AI and really considering that as a business. But what else would you guys say? Outside of that, can you think of anything maybe to answer Alvaro's question there?
It's decide what it is you're going to use it for or not use it for.
Okay.
It's making sure that is extremely communicated to your entire team in an administrative way, and then enforcing that, because you cannot leave it to chance. Every day somebody opens up a browser, there's a new version of a free, chat bot that they can put stuff into. That's data that they unintentionally are giving away. They're not doing this in a malicious way or anything else, but if they don't know, then the likelihood of that is increased, right? So you have to definitely convey that information in a way that makes them understand why it's important.
I love it. And that's where we're going to start. If everybody listening to this call can start establishing direction and policy and procedure and oversight now, you're going to be far ahead of everybody else that hasn't figured that out in a year. All right. So that was one that's open. We've got another one that was answered, and Jackson posted a fantastic thing. I hope you all can see it. The question is basically, I'm too small, and I've heard that for years. And I'll be honest with everybody on this call. When I first started in IT 22 years ago, I kind of thought, and that was a different landscape then, but I kind of thought, nobody will attack this small business. Nobody. Now, at 20 years, 20 plus years down the road, I can guarantee you that small business will be attacked. And I can guarantee you you're a target because in my opinion, you're a soft target. You don't have policy. You don't have budget for stuff. You have, accounting people that'll just wire money. So it is, I can guarantee, I've seen it through the years that small business is a target. What else? That's it. And thanks, Jackson, for chiming in on that. He posted a really fantastic link there, and that basically says small firms are attacked every single day. Do we have anything else here in any other questions? And thank you, Alvaro, and thank you for Jacob for asking those questions. We have another minute or two with y'all. Are there any other questions that we can address so that this fantastic panel can talk about? Give you just another couple seconds if anybody wants to type anything.
Well, while we're waiting on another question,
Sure.
I can kind of dive back into Jacob's question a little bit.
Okay.
Because think about where your email's hosted, whether it's G Suite or Microsoft 365. That is one portal to access probably millions of organizations, right?
Yes.
So if they know a domain name and how you structure your email addresses, most companies are either first dot last name or first initial last name at whatever. And so if going back to the beginning, if that information's out on dark web ID or out on the dark web somewhere, then all they're doing is pinging that information into 365 or G Suite to see what they can get to. And if they can get in because you don't have MFA enabled, you've got an open door.
And
Yeah,
that's where that shadow IT conversation comes in. And that's where also the assessment conversation comes in, right? If you're not looking every quarter for those leftover accounts, the ones you forgot about, the people who are maybe no longer in the organization that should have been disabled, but for somehow didn't get disabled.
Yep.
And it's still an active account, or right. All of those are the things that you're talking about.
And this actually leads to the next question, Dan. I'm sorry.
Sure, let's do it.
But Alvaro asked another question about what framework or methodologies do you recommend? So, if you're not in an industry for CMMC or HIPAA or any of those, NIST CSF or the CIS controls. CIS controls is, NIST is an add-on to that and it takes things further. But that's your basic, this is the blocking and tackling and policies you need as a regular small, medium-sized business to stay secure. And Dave, I'd be curious if you had a different answer than that.
No, I agree with that. I think if you approached it from either one of those, you would be well on your way to getting towards something that might come up later, right? Like keep in mind, I mean, a lot of small businesses they don't think about this so much, but we all probably take credit cards, which puts a PCI compliance regulation. Now that's not a law, that's a private framework, but that is like, the credit card, companies, the merchants, right? The providers, I'm sorry. So, I mean, we all fall under that. And by doing that simple framework of the CSF or the CIS, you're getting yourself very close to being where you need to be anyway.
The last thing I'll add on that, and we'll wrap this thing up, is don't think as a person in a business, as an IT new IT leader, or the person in accounting that's in charge of IT. Don't think you have to invent this stuff from scratch. There's plenty of platforms on the web with MSPs, with their partners that literally will gather information from you and just guide you through this process as far as evaluating versus NIST, PCI compliance, HIPAA, cyber insurance availability. That's a really good one. There's platforms that we're familiar with here on this call that you can enter your information to say, yes, you're insurable. No, you're not insurable. And here's how to get you insurable. So there's a lot of fantastic stuff. Just you got to be able to ask the right people, people similar to the people on this call. We're all glad to help you. So I'll let's see. We had one more question chime in real fast. We got 2 minutes. So understanding that a focus on improving your cybersecurity posture is a directive that needs to come from the top. Totally agreed. what are the most effective ways that you found to engage executives? I could talk about this, but I'm going to turn it over to y'all. What do y'all got? How do you engage executives to really care and drive IT?
Understand the business, understand how they make money.
Okay.
That's the biggest way to have that conversation. At least in my experience, if you know how they sell their widget or whatever they do, and you can talk to that and explain the risk to their business, I think that's very powerful.
Tie it back into what they do and say, look, here's the risk to the way you generate money, and make that clear. I like that. Jackson or Dave, any feedback on that?
Yes.
I would just add, and maybe this is the lawyer in me, there are regulatory requirements for things like incident response plans, depending on what industry you're in or what standards you're expected to follow. So, that's another way is like, look, I don't make the rules. Here's a case where the California Attorney General just sued this firm and got a judgment for, $1.5 million. That's not even the private lawsuit. That's just the state suing you in an enforcement action because you didn't meet their cybersecurity standards.
I love it. And Dave, do you have anything for us there?
I think it's just about educating them and speaking to them from a strategic perspective, right? They're not interested in, like tools or technical jargon, or they need to understand why it's important to them and why it's important to the business that they listen to whatever it is that you're talking about. And so it's about identifying those risks and asking them, are you okay with this? If this happens, how does that look to you? Are you all right? Is this acceptable? This is the outcome for the organization. Is that something that you're all right with? Make them understand when they're going to be sitting at their desk and they're going to be writing letters to their client base to tell them that their information was breached and they're going to be paying for credit monitoring for the next 2 years for them. That's something they will understand that impacts them and the business strategically.
All the answers to that question from the panel were kind of cousins of each other, and they all kind of tie into the same conversation with the business owner. And I appreciate, Dave, your perspective as a business leader, as a business owner, through your career. Well, this has been really fun. This has been really insightful. I learned a lot from all of our panelists, and I always do. But I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I want to thank Galactic for partnering with us on this, in this endeavor. And, be on the lookout, everybody, for future similar events and the stuff from both Galactic and IronEdge. Dig it up, go find it. It's some valuable stuff. And we will see you all again next time. So thanks again for coming, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you all.